Okay, my name is David Fass. I'm the trainer at InetSoft, and we will start the webinar in just a moment. Basically going to be looking at creating charts in a dashboard. So let me show you what we're going to do. Basically, we're going to try to do these 4 charts that you see here. They display data in a variety of different ways. Some of them you might find yourself doing something similar. In other instances, it might not look like the kind of chart that you need to create, but nevertheless, what you're going to learn in the course of this webinar will be helpful for creating different charts that might be more appropriate to your own application. Okay, so let's begin, and before we get into creating these actual charts, what we're going to do is we're going to just give a little introduction to charts in general. So I happen to have a server up and running, so let me see if I can find my browser. Okay, and I've got the user portal here. Right, so to create a dashboard, as we learned last time we did this short training a month ago, to create a dashboard, you go in the user portal to the Design tab and then to the Visual Composer link. And you click on that, and that opens the Visual Composer, which is the tool for creating dashboards. Okay, so let's quickly create a new dashboard, and to do that I'll press the New View Sheet button. As I mentioned last time, View Sheet is a dashboard, so when you see the term View Sheet, think dashboard. And when you do that, it asks you to select a data source. And for all the examples that we're going to do here, to use our sample data model, which we can find over here under the orders data source. There's the order model, so I'm going to select that. And let's begin by just looking at the most basic elements of creating a chart. Okay, so let's take a look at creating a chart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the chart component here in the component panel, and you drag it in. That gives you a blank chart, and you can resize that and so on. Now, the fundamental thing that I want to bring your attention to is that when you're dealing with a chart, you're always going to find that your fields, your list of fields, are divided as dimensions and measures. Okay. Now this happens automatically. The person who designs the data source can control that if they wish. So the person that designed this data model, you may have assigned particular fields to be dimensions and particular fields to be measures. But if the designer did not do that, then these will still be grouped as dimensions, as measures, and measures based on the data type. Okay, so you're always going to find your fields listed as dimensions and measures. And basically the idea is that dimensions are for grouping. So whenever you want to do some kind of a grouping operation, group the data in the chart in various ways, you're almost always going to be doing that based on a dimension, right? So you'd grab a dimension and then group based on the dimension. In general, measures are for aggregation. So whenever you want to aggregate something, summarize some numerical set of values, generally you're going to be doing those operations on measures. So, the way to think about it is dimensions are for grouping, measures are for aggregating. Now, in the event, and I think I pointed this out last time, in the event that for whatever reason a particular field gets assigned as a dimension or a measure and it should not be, you can change it. You can right-click on a field and change a measure to a dimension and change a dimension to a measure. Okay, let's take a look at how these works just in the most simple case. So I'm just going to, for this blank chart, just grab a measure such as the product total, and I'm going to drag it onto the Y region in the chart editor. So I'm going to grab this field, drag it down here, and immediately the chart now displays that data, and you can see that what it's doing is it's just summarizing that field, right? So that's a field that has product totals for each product. Right? And so what the chart is doing, because that's a measure, it's basically just aggregating that. It's looking at the entire data set, and it's summing up all of those totals, and it gives us just this one point on the chart. This happens to be a bar because it's a bar chart, but it's basically just one value on the chart that gives us that total. Right? So that's kind of the most fundamental type of aggregation that you would see in a chart. Not a very interesting chart because generally what you would want to do is you would want to introduce some grouping into the chart. And probably the most common way is by using an axis, right? So you want to group by putting groups of data at different locations on an axis. And so to do that, what you would do typically is you'd find a dimension that you want to group by. Let's say order date. Okay, so in the order entity here, we have a date field. And let's say that I want to group this data by year. Right? So what I would do, I would grab that date field. And if I want to do that grouping on the x-axis, then I would simply drag that field down to the x-axis. Right? And now the data is grouped by year. You can see the different groups here on the bottom. So here we've got a group for 2011, and the value there is basically aggregating the totals for that group, for the group representing the year 2011. Right, so that is, from a fundamental perspective, the operation of a chart. You've got grouping operations and aggregation operations, generally aggregating measures and grouping on dimensions. Now, there are other ways to group, in addition to using the axis to create groups. For example, you could also consider using color to create groups. So I'm going to remove the date field from the x-axis. Right? And let's say that I wanted to use color to distinguish those different years rather than the location on the x-axis. So what I could do is I can grab that date field again and drag it down to the color region. Right? So again, I'm taking a dimension and I want to create groups based on that dimension. So in this case by color. So I drop it in the color area. Right? And now I've got these different groups not distinguished by different locations on the x-axis, but distinguished by different colors. Okay. And you can do multiple approaches at the same time. For example, let's say I want the grouping to be by color and also by position on the x-axis. Well, I could just grab that field and also put that on the x-axis. Right? And so now it put it back to a point type chart. But let me see if I can make this, switch it to a bar chart so we can see the colors better. Okay. So now basically I have grouping on using two different modalities. I'm grouping on the same field, grouping by date, but I'm grouping both by location on the x-axis and by using color. So what you'll find is that when you're working with dimensions, generally what you're going to be doing is grouping based on those dimensions, and you have a lot of choices as to how you want to create those groups, based on the axis location, based on color, and you can see that there's also a shape and a size and a text binding here. And these are additional ways of distinguishing groups, either by shape, by size, or by putting text labels on the groups. Okay, now as far as summarization, as far as aggregation, we've already seen that you can aggregate values, display aggregates by using an axis. Right? That's what we have in this example. We have the y-axis giving us the values of these different aggregates. Right? So you look at each bar, and the height of the bar tells you the value of the aggregate for that group. But there are other ways of displaying aggregates as well. So let me make this a little bit simpler so we can see what's going on. So here we are back to our basic bar chart. Let's say that I wanted to display another measure. In addition to the total, the aggregated total, let's say I wanted to aggregate this measure called quantity purchased. Right? So there's another measure here, quantity purchased. Right? And so, of course, what I could do is I could add that to the y-axis here, and that would give me basically two bar charts, which I could then put onto the same axis or leave in different axes. But let's say that I wanted to use instead color to represent the aggregation of quantity purchased. Well, what I would do is I would take that measure and I would drag it down to the color region. Right? So if I want to use color to represent the aggregate, I drop it in there. Okay. And now I've got a color spectrum, and it's going to basically color the different groups based on the aggregate that it computes for that particular measure, in this case, quantity purchased. So what I've illustrated here is that basically dimensions are for grouping, measures are for aggregating, and the modality in which you group and aggregate, the way you display those groups or display those aggregates, can vary considerably depending on the modality that you choose. You might choose to use the axis to display a measure or a dimension, or you might choose to use color, shape, or size to display a measure or a dimension. Okay, so those are some of the basics of charts, and what I'd like to do now with that introduction behind us, and hopefully all of the audio problems behind us, is take a look at some of these sample charts that I have here in the slide. So let's begin by doing this top one here, and basically it breaks out, it has the years along the top x-axis, it has the categories along the bottom x-axis, and then it displays two different measures. It displays the product total, and it displays discount. Right, the product total is displayed using the axis, and the discount is displayed by basically the fill of the circle. Okay, and then we're also using color to distinguish two different groups: USA East and USA West. These are different regions that the customers are in. And then the size of the point is going to be reflecting the aggregated quantity purchase. So this is really an illustration of just throwing together all these different notions of multiple measures and multiple dimensions and multiple modalities of displaying data. So let's go ahead and begin creating this one. So back to the portal, and I'll delete this chart that I just made. Don't need that anymore. And now we'll add a new chart here, and we'll make it a little bit bigger, give us some room to work. I guess that's fine. And to begin, the dimensions that we want are, first of all, category on the x-axis. So I'm going to find the category field. Here's product category, and that's going to be on the x-axis of the chart. So basically I'm deciding that I want to group that field by using different labels on the x-axis. Then we also want another grouping field. We want to use the date field to give us different years. So I'm going to find the date field, drag that also into the X region in the editor. Okay. And so you can see that now I've got the categories along the top x-axis and I've got the years along the bottom x-axis. Which might be fine, but actually the picture that I showed you a moment ago has the years on the top. So, so how do I fix that? Well, I'm just going to reverse the order of these two fields that I have on the x-axis. So I'm just going to move this one up here. Right? And so now I've got dates along the top, the years, and I've got the categories along the bottom. I haven't assigned any measure yet. I'm not aggregating anything, so you don't see any aggregate value. It's just basically has a bunch of placeholders there. Okay, now if you wanted to change the grouping of the dates, for example, if you wanted it grouped by quarter or by week or something like that, you can do that, and I'll show you how to do that in a later example. So in case you're wondering how you would control that, you can certainly, if you stick around, you'll find out. Okay, so we've got two dimensions. Now we want to add another dimension. We want to add also the customer region as a dimension. Right? And this one, we want to do this grouping of this particular dimension by using color. So we want to assign different colors to the two different regions, which are USA East and USA West. So I'm going to grab the region field and drag it all the way down to the color area. And now that will break out the two groups, USA East and USA West, using different colors. So right now we have a chart with three different dimensions on it, category, year or date, and customer region, but no measures. So let's proceed to do the measures. And I should point out, you don't have to do this in any particular order. I'm just doing the dimensions first, just because it seems nice to get the dimensions out of the way. But if you wanted to add a dimension and then add a measure and then add another dimension and add another measure, that's perfectly a legitimate way to do it. Okay, so now the first measure that we want to add that's going to use the y-axis here is the product total. So I'm going to find that field. Okay, here's product total. Drag that down to the y-axis. Right? That's how you assign a field to be displayed on an axis. Right? And now we get this. So now it is displaying aggregates. Right? So for different combinations of year and category, I can see the different values, the different aggregations of the total based on the two regions, USA East and USA West. Okay, now this is a bar chart, but what we wanted was a point type chart. Right? So if we look back at the picture here, right, clearly this is not a bar chart. This is a point type chart. So I'm going to make that change at this point and press the Select Chart Style button. This is in the Data panel here. There's a button. The leftmost button is Select Chart Style. And I'm going to switch this to a point type chart. Right, there are a bunch of different chart types, so we're going to see a couple more of these in, as we work through the other examples. But for this one, we'll choose the point type chart, press Apply. Okay, and now these are displayed as points. Right, so there are, hopefully it's visible on your screen, but there are two different colors. There's red and blue, and they're being displayed as points. Now, if I want to make the if I want to make the red and blue a little bit more distinct, I can change those colors, right? I'm not trapped in the default color scheme. What I can do is down here in the color region, if you press the Edit Color button, it's this little pencil button down here, then I can change these colors. So here's the first color being used is the blue. Here's the second color being used is the red. So what I might do is maybe make this a pure blue color. Let's see, that would be red, green, blue, so 0000 FF if I just want to enter the code. And if I want to make this a pure red color, red, green, blue, so that's FF 0000. Those are just the color codes. You could also pick your colors from the color wheel. And that just makes those colors a little bit, a little bit brighter, pops out a little bit more. Okay. Now, we want to additionally put on this chart a couple of other measures. First of all, I want to display the quantity purchased, and to do that, to display that measure, that aggregation, I want to use the size of the points. So first of all, I'm going to find that field, the quantity purchased field. Here it is. And if I want to use the size of the points to represent those aggregates, I'm going to drag that field down to the size region. Right, so all the way down here at the bottom of the editor, there's a size region, and this allows you to, for a measure, allows you to represent the aggregate by using the size of the chart element. Right, and so this is the result that you get. Now the points have different sizes, and those sizes are determined by the aggregated quantity purchased for that particular group. Right, so where you see a very large circle, that means that for that particular group, that's a large, summed quantity purchased for that particular group. Where you see these smaller points, it means that if you add up all the quantities purchased in that group, in this case graphics, then it's going to be a smaller value. Right? And there's a scale over here. The legend gives you kind of a quick visual estimate of what those different values represent. But if you want to find the actual value, the easiest way is just to point at the point, and then the tooltip will give you the information. Right? So I can look at this one. This point here, and the tooltip tells me that that represents 728 units purchased. All right, so that's to get the actual detailed data, that's the easiest way to do it. Okay, we're going to add one more measure, and that is the discount. Right, so what I'd like is for each of these groups, I also want to see the average discount for that group. So in this case, I'm going to use the shape region here. Basically, that will allow me to use the fill of the point to represent that aggregate. So I'm going to find the discount field, which is in this order entity. Right, so there's the discount field, and I'm going to drag that down to the shape region. And that will display basically a fill within each of those points, and the size of the fill represents the discount. Now, there's one thing to pay attention to here, which is that if we look over here, you can see that the discount is actually being summed. Right? So for each of these groups, what it's doing is it's taking every discount for every order in that group, and it's summing them together. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Probably what we should do is we should average them, because these are percentages. So if I want to change the aggregation method to average, and this is the case for any of the aggregates that you do, the procedure is that you find the aggregate that you want to change the aggregation method for. So in this case, it's the discount, order discount, which I have in the shape binding. You press the little calculator button, which is the edit measure button, and that pops up this panel. And then you can change the aggregation method from here. So I can change this aggregate. Instead of summing the discounts together, I can select average, press apply, and now the fill within these points is giving me the average discount for each group. So this is a scrolling chart, incidentally, if you're wondering where the other years went. Right, so they're off to the right here. So what I can do is I can make the legend a bit smaller. Okay, so the legend takes up a bit less room, and I can scroll this chart. Now, it's a little bit difficult in the design view, which I'm in now, to scroll. You have to, grabbing that scroll bar takes a little bit of dexterity, but it's much easier for the user. So in the design view, the scroll bar is a little tricky, but you know, when somebody's using this dashboard for real, the scroll bar is right there and very accessible. But anyway, this is the chart that we've created. Okay, so this is a chart with 3 different dimensions and 3 different measures. Okay, let's just take a look back at the picture and see if we missed anything for this example. No, I think that's about it for this example. The only other thing I'll do here is just illustrate that you know, right now this is a kind of a horizontal chart. It scrolls to the right. If I want to make it more vertical, then what I could consider doing is, rather than having the different years, where do I have the year? I have that on the x-axis. What would happen if I put the date field here on the y-axis? Okay, so I'm going to grab the date field and move it down to the y-axis. And then what you can see is that I get a vertical scrolling charts, right? So now I've got, you know, it's the same chart, it's just that the years are now broken out vertically. So when you're creating your own charts and you're trying to get a particular representation of the data, and if you want certain data to be displayed vertically or horizontally, then generally what you want to do is just play around with which fields you have on which axis. Right? So, you know, if you create a chart and it has the wrong orientation, just, you know, move the field from one region to another until you get it right. Okay, so that's our first example, and that wow, that's our first example. Wow. Okay, that took a lot longer, probably because of the audio problems than I thought. But in any case, that illustrates using different dimensions and different measures. Okay, let's move on to another example. So I'm going to, I'll just leave that open in the background, and I'll create another dashboard. And now we'll take a look at the next example here, which is this kind of pie chart. Right? It's actually a set of pie charts. And basically what we're doing is we're creating a pie chart based on different regions, based on different salespeople, and breaking out the different categories, showing the total for each category. So again, this is using multiple dimensions. There's only one measure in this case, it's just the total, but we're using 3 different dimensions. And then we're also going to illustrate how you can group together a set of labels. Okay, so let's go ahead and create this one. Right, so here's a new chart, blank chart. Okay, and we'll begin by seeing what we want over here. We want the region basically on the x-axis, and we want if we look at the picture here, right, so region we want on the x-axis, and we want the different salespeople. Here I've called it Team Sue and Team Robert. You'll see why that is in a second, on the y-axis. And then we want to create these pie charts. So let's begin by first creating just a basic pie chart. Right? So I'm going to, first of all, find the measure that I want. Right? The size of the slices of the pie are going to be representations of the total. So I'm going to grab the total field, put that on the y-axis. And I want to distinguish the different groups by color. Right? And the different groups represent, if we look back at the picture here, they represent different categories. So the different slices of the pie are different categories. So to do that, I'm going to find the category field and drag that down to the color region. Right? If you want to group by color, you drag the dimension down to the color region, and you get grouping by color. Now, obviously, this is not a pie chart. This is a bar chart. So let's switch it into a pie chart. And again, you do that from the Select Chart Style button. So you press Select Chart Style, and then I'm just going to select the pie type chart, press Apply. And that gives us just a very rudimentary pie chart. Okay, so now what's different between this chart and the one that I have in the picture here? Well, the one that I have in the picture is breaking it out by region and also by salesperson. So let's make that happen. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to find the region field, customer region. Okay, so here's the customer region field. And I'm just going to drag this down to the x-axis because I want to basically group on region using the x-axis. So grab that field, drag it down to the x region, okay, and that breaks out the data. Again, whenever you're working with dimensions, you're always talking about grouping, right? So that creates groups based on that field, based on the region field. And I've got two groups now, and I still have the grouping by product category that I had earlier. Okay, now additionally, I want to group by salesperson, so I'm going to find that field. Find the salesperson first name. Here it is, salesperson first name. And in this case, I want to put that on the y-axis. I want to group based on first name using the y-axis. So grab that first name field and drag it into the y-axis here. I'll put it above the total. And that gives me this kind of chart. Right? So it's basically, I'm just introducing more and more levels of grouping. Right, so we've got the original grouping, which is by color based on the category field. We've got a grouping based on region, and now I've got another grouping based on salesperson first name. And if you point at any of the slices on any of the pie charts, the tooltip will give you all of the details for that slice: the salesperson, the region, the actual value, and so on. Okay. Okay, what else is there to do here? The only remaining thing to do, other than perhaps changing the titles, if we look back at the picture, is you can see that over here we don't have the actual salespeople on the y-axis. Instead, what we have is Team Sue and Team Robert. So what I'd like to do here is I'd like to create some ad hoc groups. Right? Basically, for these four salespeople, I want to create two teams. One team is going to be Sue and Eric, and it's going to be Team Sue. And the other team is going to be Robert and Annie. So you can actually do this very easily just within the chart itself. You don't need to go back and create any new groupings in your data or anything like that. What you do is you simply select the labels that you want to group together. So that would be Sue and Eric. I just control-click to select the two labels, and then right-click with those labels selected, select Group, and then just give it a name. So I'll call that Team Sue. Okay, so that's Team Sue, or is it Team Robert? No, it's Team Sue, I think. Okay, press OK, and that creates that group. So now I've got Team Sue. Basically, it lumps the those two employees together. There's a question I'll take in just a moment, unless it's something about the audio, lost audio. Well, let me see if other people have a similar issue, and I'll try to reset the buffer again. So yeah, let me know if you other people also can't hear me. And so what I want to do then is just continue and do the same thing here. Select Robert and Annie, and I want to make these guys a group. So after you select the labels, then select Group, and we'll call this Team Robert. Press OK. Okay, and now we've got these two groups here and the two groups there. Okay, somebody else is able to hear okay, so great. Thank you very much, Sherry and Lynette. Appreciate the, the feedback. So I'm assuming that most people can hear. Okay, and that basically is the chart that we were shooting for, right? So we've got the two different regions. Now we've got these two different, if you want to call them super groups, you could call them that. It's basically Sue and Eric lumped together and Robert and Annie lumped together. And that illustrates a few different aspects of creating pie charts, and again, using multiple dimensions and measures and doing named groupings. Okay, let's take a look at the next example. It's possible we won't get to the last one, although if people want to stay online a little bit longer than expected, I'd be happy to do it. Okay, so the next example is an illustration of what we call chart calculations. Okay, so basically, in many cases when you represent data on a chart, yes, you're aggregating the data, but sometimes you don't want to display that aggregate in its raw form. Right? So sometimes rather than displaying raw dollar amounts, you'd prefer to represent them as percentages or perhaps percent change from some previous value if you're looking at a time series. Right, so those methods of representing an aggregate in different ways is what we call chart calculations. So let's go ahead and build this chart over here. You can see that there are two different chart regions that will give us a little bit of exposure to different chart calculations. Okay, so back over here, I'm going to create another new dashboard. Again, just based on the order model. I don't want you to get the impression that you need to create a new dashboard for each chart. I'm just doing this so that I have enough space to work in. I could certainly create all those charts in a single dashboard if I have enough space. Okay, so let's add a chart over here, and this chart is going to be a little bit wide, so we'll drag it like this, drag it like this. Okay, and then what we want on the x-axis here is we want it broken down month by month. We want grouping by month, right? And here's where I mentioned earlier, I'll show you how to do change the date grouping. Here's where I'm going to show you how. First of all, I'm going to find the date field that I want to put on the x-axis. Find the date dimension. Here it is, and that goes on the x-axis. Okay, and now by default it always displays as year. If you want to change it to a month grouping, or to any other grouping for that matter, what you do is you press the Edit Dimension button. Okay, so just like this. Right, and then there's this level property here. This is what does it. And I'm just going to switch that level property from year to month. And that will break out the date field by month. So that's how easy it is. Now, the next things that I want to do are add a couple of measures. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add the same measure twice, because what I want to have is two different chart regions. The top region that displays a percent change from previous for each month, and then the bottom region which gives me a running total. Now, both of these are based on the same aggregate, right? So again, what we call chart calculations are just different ways of representing the aggregate. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to find the product total is the measure that I'm going to use for both of these. And so, in fact, I'm going to add that twice onto the y-axis. Right? So add the product total once, and then add it a second time. And now, right now, it does not break up the chart into two parts because these are exactly identical, so it just gives me the one series. But if I make any changes to distinguish these two measures on the y-axis, for example, if I change the aggregation method or the calculation method, which I'm about to do, then it will break out those series separately. So let's go ahead and set the different calculation methods here. For this top one, this top product total, I want to represent these values, right? So right now these are the raw values, the raw totals for each month. But I would like to represent these as the percent change from the previous month. So to do that, I click the Edit Measure button. That's the little calculator button there. And you can see that there's this Calculate property here. That's the property that we want. And so I'm just going to look in here for percent from previous. Right, and you can see that there are a bunch of other options, moving average, percent from first, and so on. These are all different ways of representing the same value. Right, so in this case, I want percent from previous. Select that, press Apply. And the first thing that you'll notice is that it breaks up the chart now into two different regions. Right? So it recognizes that even though it's the field is the same in each case, it's the total field, but we're representing the values differently. In the top, we're representing them as percent from previous, and the bottom, we're representing them still as the raw values. Okay, well, let's make a change here. Well, first let's address the bottom chart. Although, actually, before we do that, let's change the chart style. Okay, so in the example, we want this top chart as a bar chart and the bottom chart as a line chart. Now, the way that you do that when you want to have multiple styles within a single chart object is you press the Select Chart Style button. Right, that's the button that you would generally use to change the chart style. The problem is that if you just go ahead and select one of these chart styles, then that style will apply to both series, both data sets on the chart. That's not what we want. We want a bar chart up top. We want a line chart at the bottom. So if we want that kind of thing, then you have to select the multiple styles option. All right, so in this panel down at the bottom and the left, there's a multiple styles option. Then press apply. And then next to each of the measures, you're going to find an individual chart style button. So now I can set independently the top and the bottom. So for the top one, I'm going to switch that to a bar type chart. And for the bottom one, I could either leave it as is, or I could explicitly set it to a line type chart. When you don't explicitly set a chart style, basically there's an automatic operation that determines the appropriate style for the data that you're looking at. So in general, if you're looking at a time series, the default will be a line chart. If you're looking at categorical data, the default will be a bar chart and so on. But you can always change it. Okay, so now we've got a bar chart and a line chart. Now let's return to this bottom chart here. Now that we've got the top one with the calculation as % from previous, I want to set the calculation for the bottom chart to a running total. So basically what I'd like to do is I'd like to accumulate the totals as I go month to month. I want to add the current month's total to all the previous month's totals and then reset at each new year. And that basically lets me see as the year progresses how my totals are accumulating. Okay, how do you do that? Well, again, chart calculation, you go to the measure that you want to represent. You press the Edit Measure button, the little calculator button, and from the Calculate menu, you just choose the representation that you want. In this case, it's going to be running total. Okay, so select running total. And then if you need to set an option, for example, a reset, right, if you want to reset the running total at a particular interval, you press the Edit button here, and then you can just make the change here. You can set, we could do a reset each year, set it to year, press OK. So now we've got this is going to be a running sum and reset at each year. And you can see that the result is basically what you would expect, that the value as you go month to month gets ever higher, right? Because it can only unless you have a negative a negative total for a particular month, which our data set never does. Then it's always going to continue going higher and higher, and then when it hits January, it resets back down to 0. Okay, let's make one or two more adjustments to this chart. If we look back at the example, here, you can see that basically we've got it the way we want it, except that we want some highlighting here. We want the positive values in green, the negative values in red. Okay, so let's go ahead and make that change. Okay, and that's basically a concept called highlighting. Highlighting is conditional formatting. And so what I'll do here on this top chart is I'll add 2 highlights. So you can right-click on select any bar. It doesn't matter if it's a positive bar or a negative bar. Select a bar, right-click, select highlight. And then I'm going to add the first highlight is going to be called less than 0. And when it's less than 0, I want to apply a red color to the bar. And then I have to set the condition. When is this red color going to apply? Press the Edit button. It's going to apply when the % change from previous. Right? You can select the different measures and dimensions. In this case, I want the highlight to be contingent on this % change from previous series. So when the % change from previous is less than 0, just filling in the menus and the fields here, append. So whenever this condition is true, then I'm going to see those values in red. Okay? And if you want to take a look and verify that that you get what you expect, there it is. So now negative values are in red, and to put the positive values in green, the approach is the same. You just right-click, select highlight, and you can add an additional highlight. You can have as many highlights as you want. This one I'll call more than 0. Set a green color here, and the condition is pretty apparent what it needs to be. % change from previous is greater than 0. Okay, and now I've got both the red and the green highlighting. And so far we've illustrated basically chart calculations, how you can represent aggregated data in different ways, and here percent change from previous. Basically each bar is showing me the change from the previous month, and down at the bottom a running total. Now there's one other thing that we want to illustrate in this example. If we go back to the slide here, what I'd like is I'd like to have a table below the chart. Now, the purpose of this webinar is not to show you how to make tables, but I want to illustrate that you can do an interesting thing, which is called a chart flyover, where when the user points at a group on the chart, you can have other components automatically update. So I'm going to use this table to help illustrate that. Okay, so what I want here is a table that's basically going to give me a weekly, it's a crosstab table, give me a breakout weekly and show me the two regions. So I'm going to create that table very quickly down at the bottom. So I'm going to close the chart editor, add a crosstab below the chart. And when I add this crosstab, it opens up a crosstab editor. Again, I'm going to kind of rush through this because I don't want to make this into a class on crosstabs. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab the date field, put it up here in the column header. I'm going to grab the customer region, put it as the row header, grab the product total, put it as the measure, and then the thing is that for the date field, I want to group the dates by week. Right, so I'm going to click on that date field, and I'm going to set the level to week, right, and that's it. Press apply, right, and that just gives me this kind of crosstab here. Right, so nothing that surprising, I hope. Certainly, if you've done this before, nothing that surprising. So we've got the different regions here, and we've got the different weeks, and you can see that this is a fairly wide table, right? It's a scrolling table, and it scrolls all the way because it's showing me all of the weeks in the data set. Now, the idea here that I'm trying to pursue is that what I'd like that when a user points at one of these month groups, right? Remember that these are month groupings, both the top and the bottom part of the chart are grouped by month. When the user points at a month, I want this table down below to display just the weeks from that month. Right, so I can change the table title to weeks. Right, and then to do this, I'm going to use the flyover feature of charts. But before I do that, I should give this table a meaningful name. It's generally a good idea, so I'm going to right-click, select Properties, and I'll just call this week table, something like that, just giving it a better name. This is just an ID that the user will not see, but it helps me when I'm building the dashboard. Okay, so let's see how we would arrange the flyover. So what you do is you right-click on the chart and go to Properties for the chart. And it's actually very simple. You can see that there's a flyover area. This is on the General tab of the chart properties. And there's the table, there's the crosstab table that we created, and all I need to do is just say that I want to use that table as my flyover view. That means when the user moves the mouse across the chart, that table will update, will be filtered dynamically based on what the user points at. So let's test it out. Okay, so I'm going to press OK. Okay, and I think we should be able to see this even in the design view that we're in currently. So let's see. So I'm going to point at April of 2013. And if you look at the table, you can see that it's showing me the weeks from April of 2013. If I point at some other group, this is July of 2012, then the crosstab down below is showing me the weeks from July of 2012. Okay, so that's the basic concept of a flyover. And you can use that not only for crosstabs, but also for regular tables and so on. So it's a very nice, handy thing. Okay, let's see where we are time-wise. Okay, I already went over, so those of you who need to sign off, I apologize for the audio problems. I'm going to continue on and do the final example here that I have. And so those of you who wish to stay for the final example, by all means. The point of the final example is just to illustrate a couple more features, one of which is the so-called data tip, which is using another viewsheet component in place of a tooltip, and also to illustrate what are these called? Target lines. Sorry, the word escaped me for a moment. Target lines are a way of putting bands on a chart that represent different important values. Here, these are percentiles, but you can also put, place an average or quantiles or confidence intervals. So these are all fall within the scope of target lines. So let's go ahead and create this chart, and there's a question. Question about the video. Yes, I am making a video of this. I will try to edit out all the sections with the audio problems, and then the video will be available. So yeah, those of you who need to go about your business, feel free, and thanks for joining. But I will just continue talking and just finish this up, and then it will be in the video. Okay, so so let's go ahead and create this one. Shouldn't take that long. Hopefully less than 10 minutes. Again, I'll create a new dashboard here. Okay, and I'm going to throw in a chart. And again, it's going to be kind of a wide chart, so I'll do something like this. Okay, and so the basic chart itself is very straightforward. It's going to be a time series, so I'm going to find the date field that goes on the x-axis, and I'll group it by month. This is what we did, very similar to the previous example, group by month. And then we want the product total as our measure, so it's going to be a series of the product totals month by month. So I find the total field, put that on the y-axis. Okay, so there's our basic chart, and in the example the line is a bit thicker. You can control the thickness of a line as well as other static properties, for example the color of the line and so on, from this area down here in the chart editor. So if I want to make the thickness of the line a bit more robust, I can just increase the thickness here, maybe put it up to 7, and you get a much thicker line. And the same is true for the color. The shape would control the, whether it's a dotted line or a dashed line and so on. Those properties, these kind of static visual properties, will vary depending on the chart type. So obviously if you're dealing with a point type chart or a bar type chart, then the shape here is not going to control the, it's not going to be dashed versus dotted. It will be something appropriate to a point type chart or to a bar type chart. For example, the bar fill or the point style and so on. Okay, so we've got our basic chart, and now I just want to illustrate a couple of things. First of all, target lines. Target lines, like I said, are a way to put, demarcate particular values on a chart. So let's go ahead and add these percentiles. So I'm going to right-click on the chart, select, let's see, I think it's plot properties. Nope, wrong, sorry. Select properties, and go to the Advanced tab. And here's the target line area, so you can add various kinds of target lines. Let's see what's available. So press the Add button, and we get this dialog box. And you can see that there's basically 3 types, line, band, and statistics. A line is if you just want to put a single line on the chart at some value. That value can be an arbitrary value, or it could be something like the maximum, the minimum, the average, computed value. A band is basically a pair of lines, right, with a region between them. So it's kind of just takes the line one step further and just adds a region that you can apply different colors to. And again, the values, the from value and the to value, these can be an arbitrary value that you type in, or it could be the maximum or the minimum or the average or any of those. Okay, but in our example, we're going to do the last one here, statistics, and this allows you to display different statistics on the chart. So in this case, what we're going to do is, first of all, select the field that we want to operate on. That's the product total field. And then I want to display some percentiles. Right? So I'm going to, from the computation field here, select percentiles. There's also percentages, quantiles, standard deviation. So in this case, percentiles is the one we want. And I want to have a line at the 25th, the 50th, and the 75th percentile. So right now there's only one at the 50th, so I'm going to change that by pressing the Edit button, and I'll add, just separating them with commas, 3 different percentiles, 25, 50, and 75. That'll give me the 25th, the 50th, and the 75th percentile. Press OK. And then the rest of it is really just aesthetics. I can set the line style I'll leave as just as it is, and I'll set the color to black. And then we've got a couple fills, fill above and fill below. That means above the 75th and below the 25th. So maybe I'll make above the 75th, I'll make a kind of a lime green. Below the 25th, I'll just make that a kind of a plain gray. And then there's two other bands that I have to fill because there's, right, so I've got one band up to the 25th, then from 25 to 50, then another one from 50 to 75, right, and then I've got the fill above, right, so I have to assign colors for two additional bands. And I can, I could just leave them as they are, or I could pick some, some other colors here. Maybe I'll pick kind of a blue color and, kind of a brown color. Anyway, these might not be the best choices, but just see what that looks like, and then press OK. All right, so there's my target line. It's now defined. And that basically just draws the target lines on the chart. All right, so I've got the 25th percentile, 50th percentile, 75th percentile, and it's giving me the actual values, right? So that's displaying the actual values. I can make those bigger by clicking on one and increasing the size. In the example, though, rather than having the actual values, what we actually had was just the label 25th, 50th, and 75th, and that's just a change that you can easily make. Just go back to Properties, and for this target band, just press Edit. Okay, and what I neglected to change was here, the label. Instead of target value, I'll just change that to target formula. Press OK. Right, and now it just displays the labels, 25th, 50th, and 75th. So you can choose, what you want that value, what you want those labels to say. Okay, so that's a quick exploration of target lines. Obviously, there's a lot of different variations, and you can try it out at your leisure. Let's do the one last thing, and that way I'll feel like I've, even if some of you have had to go, I'll feel like I covered all the material. And that is I want to show you how to do a data tip, which is basically using another dashboard component in place of the tooltip. So first of all, what is the tooltip that I keep talking about? Well, a tooltip is when you move the mouse over any data point, you get this pop-up tooltip that gives you useful information. And it turns out that you can actually customize this tooltip. We'll see that in a moment. But you can go further. In addition to just customizing the text of the tooltip, you can actually replace the tooltip with another dashboard component or a set of dashboard components. And in this case, what we want to do is we want to have a pie chart that will pop up that will break down the data in that point, right? Whatever point you point at on the chart, break it down into the different salespeople's sales for that month. Okay, so that's the goal. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. To do that, first of all, we have to create the chart that we want to use as the data tip. So I'm going to have to create that pie chart. So I'm going to close this chart editor and add another chart over here. This is going to be a little small chart, something like this, little small chart, and I want to have a pie chart. And so we already know how to do a pie chart. I want the product total is going to be the measure, so I put that on the y-axis, and then I can switch this to a pie chart. So from select chart style, switch it over to a pie. Right, so now I've got a pie chart. Now the reason that there's no slices is because I haven't specified any grouping. I haven't selected a dimension yet. So what I want to do is I want to find the salesperson first name, and this is going to be my grouping dimension. So grab the first name, and I want to use color to distinguish those groups. So drag that down to the color region. Right, and that gives me a basic pie chart, breaking it out by salesperson. Now I don't want the legend. What I prefer is just the name next to the slice. So first of all, let's get rid of the legend. Right-click on the legend and hide that. And I can also hide this title, the y-axis title. Usually looks weird on a pie chart. So right-click and select Hide Title. All right, so now we've got just this basic pie chart. But I do want to display the names of the different salespeople. So I can do that by just right-clicking on the chart and selecting Plot Properties. And there's an option there, Show Values. So I'll just select that, and that should give me. Oops, I'm sorry. That gives me the sales, the measure. So that's not actually what I want. My mistake. So let me go back and turn that off. plot properties, turn off show values. What I want is the names, right? So how do I do that? To do that, I can use the text region down here, right? So again, if I want to break out groups by using the labels, that's what you use the text region for. So I'm going to find, again, the first name field. I can use a field more than once, so even though I'm using the first name field in the color region to group using color, I can also group using text. So I'm going to drag that down to the text region, and that just puts the different labels on the different groups. Okay, so that's the basic pie chart that I'm after. Now, the question is, how do I use it as a data tip for this chart up here? Well, the first thing I should do is I should give it a more meaningful name. So I'm going to right-click on this chart and go to Properties for this little chart, and I'm just going to change the name to something better like Employee Pie or something like that. Okay. It's always good to give a meaningful ID. Okay, and now I can go ahead and I can use this chart as the data tip. And that part is fairly simple once you've got the component all set up. You just right-click on the chart for which you want to apply the data tip. Select Properties. And you can see that there's a data tip view area here. So for the tip, select data tip view, and then from the menu, select the component or group of components that you want to use as the data tip. And you can actually group multiple components together. For example, if you wanted a set of 5 gauges or a couple of tables to pop up, you could actually create a group of multiple components, and you'd see the group listed here as well. But in this case, it's just a single element. The employee pie is what we want, and I can set the transparency to something like 70. That just makes it a little bit see-through. And that's basically it. That's how you set a component to be a data tip. Press OK. And I don't think we'll see it, yeah, we don't see it work in the design view here, right? So I'm in the design view right now. What I need to do in order to see this working is I need to do a preview. Or, of course, I could deploy the dashboard to the portal, would also work, but since I'm working in Visual Composer here, I'll just do a preview. Right? And the first thing you notice is that the pie chart that we made is not visible. Right? That's by design. When you designate a component as a data tip, it will not be visible in the dashboard until such a time as you actually go ahead and point at the chart, a group on the chart, where that component is being used. Right? So the pie chart that we created is being used now as a data tip for this chart, and if I point at any particular month, I'm going to see that chart pop up, and the chart is showing me the data just for that month. Okay. Now, if I move the mouse over this little chart, you can see that the data tip chart, the pop-up chart, also has a tooltip. And so I don't suggest getting into endless recursion here and making all kinds of pop-ups on pop-ups. But what we could do is I just want to illustrate how you can customize this tooltip. Right. So because we have the labels on the pie chart, we might consider it unnecessary to have such a verbose tooltip that gives us both the total and the salesperson name. Perhaps we just want it to give us the total. So let's make that last change, and then I'll wrap it up and take any questions. So how do we make that change? We go back to the design view, and I'm going to change the tooltip for this chart. So right-click on this chart, select Properties, and I'm not going to do a data tip view, but rather what I'm going to do is I'm going to customize the tooltip. And this just illustrates, some of the flexibility that's available in terms of making different kinds of tooltips and data tips. So press the Customize button, select Custom, and then the way this works is it gives you special codes that you can use to insert the values. So in this case, rather than having this verbose description of both the salesperson name and the total, I just want this to have a $sign and then the total, right? So the total is given to me by a 0 in curly braces. That's what this description down here tells me. If I want the total, type a 0 in curly braces, and that's what I've done with a $sign. And then this is going to be my tooltip for that little chart. And so that's an example of a custom tooltip. And if I go ahead and refresh the preview, and then take a look over here, so again, it pops up. But now when I point at any of these slices, rather than giving me the very large tooltip, it just gives me that just the total. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm not sure how many of you are left, but please feel free to ask any questions. You can, I guess you could type in the chat box, or there's a question box. For those of you who need to go and who stuck around this long, thank you very much. I apologize I ran over time and for the audio problems, and hope to see you again back next month. So I'll stay online for a few more minutes to see if people have questions.